This is a video about the linguistic autobiography, and it is part of a series, Small Teaching, Big Learning, where we feature bite-sized strategies for improving HL teaching and learning. Let's start by defining what we mean by the linguistic autobiography. Here's a fairly standard definition of this tool. It is an autobiographical story relating to personal language experiences. In terms of what it does, this title of a paper on the linguistic autobiography summarizes it best, in my opinion. Linguistic autobiographies, or making sense of one's language learning experience. And I'm going to delve into this throughout the rest of this presentation. As a teacher, I first became aware of the linguistic autobiography through Cecilia Pino's work. Cecilia Pino was an early pioneer in the field of teaching Spanish to heritage speakers. You can read her work as well as that of others in this 1997 book edited by Cecilia Colombi and Francisco Alarcón. This is still very relevant, the information presented here. In terms of topics, the standard ones are family and school experiences that somehow connect to language. But in this video, I want to give you additional ones. And I'm going to tell you what Alicia Posada, in a paper on linguistic autobiography, suggests are topics that belong within the linguistic autobiography and that expand this concept of what you can do with the linguistic autobiography beyond just talking about family and school experiences. So she says you can ask your students to describe language, dialects, and styles used by parents, grandparents, and siblings. The relationship between the two languages, which one was learned first, or were they both learned at the same time? And who were the models that you copied as you were learning each of these languages? What about literacy? What was the context of acquisition of literacy learning in each of these languages, right? Self-rating of competence in all four skills. This is a very good prompt because our students generally give a holistic self-rating of proficiency. Oh, I'm an intermediate student in Spanish. We want to get them to think very specifically about each of these skills. That's what a prompt like this would do. We can also ask students about their attitudes towards the different varieties in their linguistic repertoire: English, Spanish, academic Spanish, home Spanish, etc. Equally important and valuable is to ask them about the attitudes of others in society, that is, society at large, about their language. The benefits or disadvantages of being multilingual is also a great topic, as is language usage patterns at different stages of your life. Posada offers this graph where she asks students to rate the frequency of usage of both of their languages with respect to the four skills and in the domains listed on the leftmost column. The reason why I'm showing this picture is because you can see that you can engage students in evaluating this even at very low levels of proficiency. And this is not the only way to do it. You can do something like this. You can have students produce a chart that represents this information. This chart, by the way, comes from work by Silvina Montreux. How can teachers use all of this information? Well, clearly, the information you get can be a very valuable diagnostic tool, which can help you differentiate instruction, right? You learn about where each of the students stands with respect to the questions that you ask. You can also use this information to design interesting class discussions. If all of a sudden everybody's telling you the same thing with respect to one of the questions, you can actually create a great discussion where students can connect with each other and consider this topic more deeply. You can also choose readings and videos that further their understanding of any one of these topics. This all adds up to a more culturally responsive curriculum design and also stronger connections with students, between students and with students, from the instructor to students. I like what Anne Charity Hudley says about this. The linguistic autobiography helps me to understand the linguistic histories of my students. And since we can all communicate in some form, gives us some linguistic common ground. Students are never required to tell me any more than they want to. I share my own linguistic autobiography with my students as a starting point. So this notion of sharing your linguistic autobiography is a very powerful one. For me, I started doing linguistic autobiographies as a way to understand my students better. And I was so inspired by what I read and what I learned that eventually I put it all together in a book that I published with Tom Beeben in 2014, where I try to give a picture of what it's like to grow up Latino, in some cases bilingual, in other cases having lost Spanish, but what it's like to grow up as a US Latino. So we can see now that the linguistic autobiography is a very wonderful tool for designing curricula with HL learners' motivations. It's also a great tool, as we said, for differentiating instruction. In terms of small teaching, we can see also that the linguistic autobiography does what James Lang describes as inspiring and motivating students to be in class. It can also help teachers value students' assets, what they can do with the HL and how they came to have the level of proficiency that they had, the efforts that they put into that. I also like it that you can use to do what Lang calls normalizing help-seeking behavior, and which I'm also going to change a little bit and say it's also about normalizing linguistic behavior and attitudes. Let me now turn to language learning in particular. The way the linguistic autobiography is usually done is in the form of an essay. If you go online, you'll find some wonderful examples in essay form of a linguistic autobiography. But what if your learners are not at the level where they can write an essay in the HL? Well, they can write in English, right? The information that you will get out of reading these essays will help you do all those other things that we have talked about: differentiating instruction, designing curricula, discussions, etc. If your students can't write, you can have them produce a video, create a chart, draw pictures, diagrams, such as those I showed you. Now, typically, the linguistic autobiography is one long essay, and it's typically done in one time, right? But an adaptation is to create regular prompts that connect to students' experiences to the material being studied at any point in class, and that allow students to constantly update their linguistic autobiography in interesting ways, again, that connect to what is being studied in the classroom. This gets to the notion of the linguistic autobiography portfolio, which at the end of a semester can be a pretty hefty collection of experiences and reflections. These can help students think about themselves deeper. They can be given to the next level up to inform teachers about students so they can better plan their lessons. And they can also be transferred to other areas of learning in an academic setting. The linguistic autobiography portfolio also connects to another topic, and that of leveling up proficiency, that linguistic autobiography can be used to level up proficiency. And by this, I mean the regular prompts that I'm talking about, kind of daily or maybe weekly prompts. You can use these to level up proficiency. Let me show you what I mean by this. Taking the can-do statements. If our students are at the novice low, we might want to level up a little bit by asking them to answer a prompt at the novice mid-level. Look at this prompt. I can caption a photo with my family members' names, ages, relationship to me, and what they like to do. This is relevant for all students, HL or second language, but it's particularly good for HL teaching because we know that our HL learners want to explore these family connections and want to communicate with family members. That's one of the main reasons why they come to us. Moving up sub-level, we can ask them to identify whom people in other cultures consider to be part of the family, who people in other cultures are considered to be part of the family, and they can fill in a few simple details. This makes for great cultural comparisons. Moving to the intermediate low level, we can modify the prompt that I have selected there by asking them to write a simple profile about somebody in their HL culture that they admire. We can also ask students to write plans for an upcoming family or social event. This again engages them in reflecting on their cultural practices. We can ask them to write about an experience related to their lifestyle, maybe one that compares what it was like when they were living at home versus what it is like if they're in college now that they are on their own. Again, these kinds of comparisons are exactly what we know our HL learners want to do. We can also ask them to write about a childhood memory. Here they're narrating in the past, but they're also connecting to these experiences. At the advanced level, we can ask them to present a comparison. Notice now this is a presentation, not writing, but speaking. We can ask them to present a comparison of current traditions or past traditions. And I've done this in my classroom. It's very interesting when they start comparing past traditions to emerging traditions as their family is settling in the United States. And moving up a level, we can ask them to give an explanation, not so much of what is there, although that would be fine, but we can ask them to give an explanation of things like la quinceañera. This is a celebration, a traditional Latino celebration in the Spanish-speaking world that Latinos have adapted, Latinos who live in the US have adapted to the American lifestyle. I did this in my class, and it made for a very interesting discussion of how culture is adapted when it is taken to another country. And it also made for cross-country comparisons, for example, how Mexicans celebrate La Quinceañera versus how Salvadorans do it. So you can see it's very rich, this view of leveling up, using the linguistic autobiography to level up proficiency also provides rich opportunities for talking about culture. Now that we have these topics, I want to get to the best. I saved the best for last. And that is for what I'm calling here public benefit. It'll become obvious in a second. If you teach using project-based learning as a product that addresses a real world problem. An excellent example of this comes from Alicia Posada, the researcher that I cited earlier in connection to different prompts or topics of discussions for the linguistic autobiography. What she did was that over the years, she collected linguistic autobiographies from her students in Puerto Rico about what it meant to be bilingual. And eventually she put them together in a book, which you can now purchase. That's an example of using the linguistic autobiography, not just to benefit the teacher and the students, but also to benefit the larger society. So I mentioned students. How do they benefit from linguistic autobiography? Well, they gain a greater awareness of their linguistic selves. How did they become who they are today? They reflect on their skills. Why is my writing not as developed as my listening skills, for example? They connect to other learners with similar experiences. They gain insight into this narrative that they have about themselves as bilingual and bicultural Americans. They gain purpose in learning. They start to, if you ask prompts that relate to this notion, they start to think about, well, why am I studying Spanish? Why is this important to me? You could ask prompts that engage them in playing with language. I know Alejandro Lee likes to ask his students about their favorite word in Spanish. You can have a lot of fun with this, right? And it also allows students to have a social presence in the classroom, a personality in the classroom, to be seen as individuals. This is the idea, by the way, behind the feature Heritage Voices at the website hlexchange.com. There are wonderful videos by heritage language learners where you can see how they reflect on their skills, what they've learned, the purpose they have gained from studying their HL. And this is an example of a narrative in my book that really brings it all together, all these things that I mentioned earlier. This student says, in school, I was labeled Mexican, but to the Mexicans, I'm an American. I am part of each, but not fully accepted by either. In high school, I was considered Mexican because I spoke Spanish, but I was considered pocho by my dad's family because my Spanish was not up to their standard. It's this weird duality in which you're stuck in the middle. Latinos are often told that they're not Americans, but also that they're not connected to their heritage. And here's the bit about purpose for this student. You take pride in both cultures and learn to deal with the rejection. You may never be fully embraced by either side. That's why you seek out other people like yourself. Socializing with people who share a common experience helps you deal with this experience. So as I come to the end of this video, let me summarize everything I've said about the linguistic autobiography. What it is a personal narrative connected to language. It can help teachers in many ways, including diagnostic assessment, differentiating instruction, personally connecting with students, and creating culturally responsive teaching. In terms of how to do a linguistic autobiography, you're not stuck doing the traditional essay. You can think about students producing videos, charts, etc. You can also use it to increase language learning, to level up proficiency. You can create linguistic portfolios, which become a growing record of students' linguistic self-awareness. And if you're really ambitious, you can create a public product, such as a book or a collection of videos. In terms of what students get out of it, well, they get to reflect on who they are linguistically and culturally, gain a sense of their linguistic selves, connect with peers, and as we saw in that comment I read to you from Voces, gain a sense of understanding or purpose, why it is so important for them to study their HL. This brings me to the end of this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you like this video or any other video, give us a thumbs up and share it with others. And as usual, we'd love to hear your comments and ideas. Thank you.